April 16th, 1963, my dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling my present activities unwise and untimely. I think I should indicate why I am here in Birmingham, since you've been influenced by the view which argues against outsiders coming in. I have the honor of serving as the president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization operating in every southern state with headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. So I, along with several members of my staff, am here because I was invited here. But basically, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so I am compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my own hometown. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Racial injustice engulfs this community. Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Its ugly record of brutality is widely known. Negroes have experienced grossly unjust treatment in the courts. There have been more unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches in Birmingham than in any other city in the nation. These are the hard, brutal facts of the case. On the basis of these conditions, Negro leaders sought to negotiate with city fathers, but the latter consistently refused to engage in good faith negotiation. You may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? You are right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. Creating tension as part of the work of the nonviolent resistor may sound rather shocking, but I must confess I am not afraid of the word tension. Just as Socrates felt that it was necessary to create a tension in the mind so that individuals could rise from the bondage of half-truths and myths, so must we see the need for nonviolent gadflies to create the kind of tension in society that will help men rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood. The purpose of our direct action program is to create a situation so crisis-packed that it will inevitably open the door to negotiation. I therefore concur with you in your call for negotiation. Too long has our beloved Southland been bogged down in a tragic effort to live in monologue rather than dialogue. Yet some of you have asked, why didn't you give the new city administration time to act? My friends, we know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see, with one of our distinguished jurists, that justice too long delayed is justice denied. We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed toward gaining political independence, but we still creep at horse and buggy pace toward gaining a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. Perhaps it is easy for those of you who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait, but when? You have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim. When you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your black brothers and sisters. When you see the vast majority of over 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society. When you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has been advertised on television, and see tears welling up in her eyes when she is told that Fun Town is closed to colored children, and see the ominous clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her little mental sky, and see her beginning to distort her personality by developing an unconscious bitterness toward white people. When you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son who's asking, Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean? When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you. When you are humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs reading white and colored. When your first name becomes nigger, your middle name becomes boy, however old you are, and your last name becomes John. And your wife and mother are never given the respected title of Mrs. When you are harried by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro living constantly in tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next, and are plagued with inner fears and outer resentments. When you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobody-ness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. There comes a time when men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of despair. You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws, since we so diligently urge people to obey the Supreme Court's decision of 1954 outlawing segregation in the public schools. It is rather strange and paradoxical to find us consciously breaking laws. One may well ask, well, how do you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? There are two types of laws: just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. An unjust law is no law at all. Now, what is the difference between the two? A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality. It gives a segregator a false sense of superiority, and the segregated a false sense of inferiority. To quote the words of Martin Buber, the great Jewish philosopher, segregation substitutes an I-it relationship for the I-thou relationship and ends up relegating persons to things. Hence, segregation is not only politically, economically, and sociologically unsound, it is morally wrong and sinful. Is not segregation an existential expression of man's tragic separation, his awful estrangement? I hope you see the distinction I'm trying to point out. I do... In no sense do I advocate evading or defying the law that would lead to anarchy. One who breaks an unjust law must do so openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty. We should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal. It was illegal to aid and comfort a Jew in Hitler's Germany. Even so, I am sure, had I lived in Germany at that time, I would have aided and comforted my Jewish brothers. At first, I was rather disappointed that my fellow clergymen would see that my nonviolence efforts would see them as those of an extremist. As I continued to think about the matter, I gradually gained a sense of satisfaction from the label. Was not Jesus an extremist for love? Love your enemies. Bless them that cursed you. Do good to them that hate you. Pray for them which persecute you. Abraham Lincoln, this nation cannot survive half slave and half free. Thomas Jefferson, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists will we be? Will we be an extremist for hate or for love? I have longed to hear white ministers declare, follow this decree because segregation is morally wrong, because the Negro is your brother. I have traveled the length and breadth of all of the southern states on sweltering summer days and crisp autumn mornings. I have looked at the South's beautiful churches with their lofty spears pointing heavenward. I have found myself asking, what kind of people worship here? Who is their God? In deep disappointment, I have wept over the church. But be assured that my tears are tears of love. There can be no deep disappointment where there is not deep love. Yes, I love the church. Yes, I see the church as the body of Christ. But how we have blemished and scarred that body through social neglect and through fear. But even if the church does not come to the aid of justice, I have no despair about the future. We will reach the goal of freedom in Birmingham and all over the nation, because the goal of America is freedom. Our Negro destiny is tied up with America's destiny. Before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth, we were here. Before the pen of Jefferson etched the majestic words of the Declaration of Independence across the pages of history, we were here. For more than 2 centuries, our forebears labored in this country without wages. They made cotton king. If the inexpressible cruelties of slavery could not stop us, the opposition we now face will surely fail. Before closing, I want to mention one other point in your statement that has troubled me profoundly. You warmly commended the Birmingham police force for keeping order. and preventing violence. I doubt that you would have so warmly commended the police force if you had seen its dogs sinking their teeth into unarmed, nonviolent Negroes. I doubt that you would so quickly commend the policemen if you were to watch them push and shove and curse old Negro women and young Negro girls, if you were to see them slap and kick Negro men and young boys, if you were to observe them, as they did on 2 occasions, refuse to give us food just because we wanted to say our grace together. I cannot join you in your praise of the Birmingham Police Department. I wish you had commended the Negro sit-inners and demonstrators of Birmingham for their sublime courage, their willingness to suffer, and their amazing discipline in the midst of provocation. One day the South will recognize its real heroes. They will be old, oppressed, battered Negro women, symbolized in a 72-year-old woman in Montgomery, Alabama, who rose up with a sense of dignity with her people and decided not to ride the segregated buses, and who responded with ungrammatical profundity to one who inquired about her weariness. My feet is tired, but my soul is at rest. One day the South will know that when these disinherited children of God sat down at lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for what is best in the American dream and for the most sacred values in our Judeo-Christian heritage. Woo! Never before have I written so long a letter. I can assure you that it would have been much shorter if I had been writing from a comfortable desk, but what else can I do? What else can one do when he is alone in a narrow jail, other than write long letters, think long thoughts, and pray long prayers? Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities, and in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their scintillating beauty. Yours for the cause of peace and brotherhood, Martin Luther King, Jr.